I too want to thank the San Jose Education Foundation for hosting this. Also our host here tonight, IBM and Hitachi. And then I noticed the TV behind me is a Panasonic. Everybody covered. This TV would look very nice in my living room. The TV's not here in the morning, you'll know where it is. Kidding. The budget this year I would characterize as basically a maintenance budget. There are concerns that some of us have, not only on the transportation shift, the nearly $1 billion that Bruce eloquently mentioned, but also a child care issue. I don't think Bruce mentioned it. It's putting more child care services, about $250 million, a little over $250 billion, under the Proposition 9810. And while some may think that the budget is generous, I mean, the challenges that we have in public education, closing the achievement gap, for example, recruiting more teachers. When you look at the projections for more teachers in the next 10 years, Dean has a lot of the recruiting to do as the incoming Vice President of the California Teachers Association. So 40% of our administrators are expected to retire in the next 10 years as well. And when you look at, I listened very carefully to Bruce with looking at his charts and the dots. And why are we a little bit lower on our NAEP scores, the national norm tests? I might suggest that it's the face of the children in California, that we have more children learning the English language. 1 out of 4 kids came to school today to learn the English language. 39% of our kindergarten kids in school today are there to learn the English, go home from school, and speak a language other than English. When you want to compare California to other states, I would suggest that it's apples and oranges to a large extent. I would also suggest that when we administer the NAEP test, we give the test as we should, and I insist upon, every student in the schools. We don't cherry pick and give to the AP students. We don't cherry pick, and I know some states, they may not cherry pick, but there are certain kids that are going to be absent that day. We give it to the special ed kids as we should. Because I also know that our student population has the greatest potential of any student population on the planet. And businesses like those that are here tonight are smart by recruiting students who are from many of these countries that you want to do business in. Because these businesses know and can understand that the people from these countries want to do business in, know the culture, know the language, know the market, know the traditions. They are people from these countries can help you do business in some of these emerging, developing countries that are attempting to dominate on the market. So we know we have a lot to do. We know we have to do a better job with professional development. We know we have to close the achievement gap. My #1 priority, and we've just created a new branch in the Department of Education, and that's going to be its major focus, is working on closing the achievement gap. Those subgroups that are growing the fastest are the ones that continue to lag behind their peers. And so we know that all students can learn. That's why we are going to stick with our high standards. We're holding our schools accountable. When the governor talks about transparency, you can go on my webpage tonight when you get home. If you haven't trouble getting to sleep tonight, I suggest you do it. You can see how well your schools perform and see how well your schools can performing other schools in the state, other schools with similar socioeconomic characteristics. And then the third column, the one I think is most important, did your school do better this year than last year? And to me, that's what's really important. Are we moving in the right direction? California, almost a decade ago, made the decision on standards-based education. So the most important line on Bruce's chart is the one that showed us moving in the right direction. If we wanted to compete with other states, we could exclude testing some kids. We could try to use some national standards that are lower than ours, and that line would move up. And to me, that's not the relevant line. We've made a decision, rightly or wrongly, we're going to be adhering to our standards. California is a standards-based education state. World-class content standards. The Fordham Foundation, multiple years now, giving California A+. This year we're one of 3 states. In fact, the last line I'll make, I'm also a big proponent of rigorous, relevant career technical education. We have friends here that have really helped us design with more rigor in this area. And there was a group from Egypt in my office this week to extrapolate our standards to their country on career technical education. And over the last 4 years, we've worked hard with UC and CSU, also with UC Regent, CSU trustee, And we worked very hard, where we more than tripled the number of classes our high schools offer in career tech that are considered for admission to UC and CSU. Not by watering down standards, to the contrary, by injecting more rigor in those courses. My preference is all those courses would be A through G. That's Russell's preference as well. Until we get there, this is our backdoor approach to more rigor, more relevance in these classes and this work.
Thanks, Jay. Russlynn. By the way, we have cards. If you have questions, just raise your hand and we will be able to get them to you.
I'm going to be really brief because I'm mostly anxious to hear what folks on the other side have to say about this. Sorry. The face of California certainly does look different today than the rest of the nation, but not for very long. The face of California is going to be the face of America. We have a role and responsibility to get this right. The more money that Bruce mentioned, absolutely necessary, as I'm sure most of you in this room know. We have long been behind the curve compared to other states in terms of what percentage of our per capita income we are willing to devote to education. Not very much compared to other states like New York and Connecticut, even states like Texas. That certainly raises the question of raising taxes, but there's an 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that's Proposition 13, that we tend not to be able to get at all because it is so radioactive politically. For us, certainly more money would help schools and districts who are struggling to develop the capacity to make their schools work better for their kids, but how much more new money helps depends entirely on how it is spent. That also brings the political and civic will to spend the money on the kids that have been most underserved for so long. And when we look at inter-district spending gaps, the difference between what a district that's able to pass bonds, for example, can spend on its kids, Piedmont versus Oakland, San Jose versus Ravenswood. There are big discrepancies there. Worse yet, though, within those districts, turns out there are very big discrepancies in terms of what we spend of the money that goes to districts. That per pupil figure that Bruce referred to. When that goes to districts, you would think that it is spent equally amongst all those district students. Turns out that is absolutely not the case. We spend more money on the kids that are least dependent on public education for their educating and teaching. In other words, we take poor kids and kids of color, and we turn around and give them less of everything that research says makes a difference in public education. That includes dollar-for-dollar resources. It also, though, is very much about the opportunity gaps that perpetuate the achievement gaps. Poor kids and kids of color in this state and in most other places in the nation are far more likely to have less access to those rigorous courses the superintendent talked about, what's known in California as the A to G curriculum, the curriculum that's necessary for entry into any of the state's four-year public colleges and universities now. Turns out we only give about 14% of California's ninth graders that are Latino. Only about 14% of them will graduate 4 years later with the A to G curriculum. That means the supermajority of our Latino graduates, those are the ones that actually don't graduate, right, have no access to the state's four-year public colleges and universities. That is a massive opportunity gap. Perhaps worse is the teacher quality gap. We know nothing matters more when it comes to teaching kids than the quality and effectiveness of the teacher in that classroom. Poor kids and kids of color in this state are anywhere from 3 to 5 times more likely to have an underprepared teacher. In fact, more than half of the state's intern teachers, those are teachers that don't hold a credential but are en route to getting one, are clustered in schools serving the most Latino and African American kids. We have to develop the kind of civic and political will that's going to be necessary to make sure that kids have been most underserved get what they need to achieve. I am thrilled that the superintendent has taken on this notion of gap closing. We have had political leaders of the recent past that preach it a lot. Gap closing is our #1 initiative without a whole lot of focus and resources devoted to doing just that. So I'm extremely hopeful that both with the Governor's Committee and its recommendations, the research from Stanford supported by Gates, and the superintendent's new initiative, that we're going to have a conflagration of events that will finally tackle this once and for all. I take issue a little bit, though, with the notion that our standards are so much better, and so that somehow means on a national assessment that we're not going to do just as well. The National Assessment of Education Progress isn't aligned to any state standards. And the fact that we are doing so much more poorly there than we are on our state standards does give us cause to really understand better what we're asking students to master on their assessments, and whether we're doing that in a way that makes those skills transportable outside of California. When it comes to CTE, I can talk about that for a very, very long time, and I hope that we will, this career tech.
We'll get to it.
Okay, so I'm going to pause on that. But my fear is, and it is often an unspoken, almost article of faith between policymakers and educators, that somehow career tech can protect kids that aren't making it in the academic core. And that can create a real big prejudice exit, an escape valve to channel kids underneath our accountability radar if we're not very, very careful.
Thank you. Faysal.
It's a tough act to follow there. So I'm neither a policymaker nor an educator. So I guess I don't have any political agenda, so I can speak my mind from the business side altogether. I got involved in education because I think that really is our future, and that's the most important thing. But as somebody who has started companies in the Valley, run companies in the Valley, funds companies in the Valley and worldwide, I think the numbers are impressive in terms of what we're spending on education, and maybe some 4% increase from last year to this year, but they're big numbers. From my perspective, what's lacking is that there's very little innovation. There's very little innovation in terms of methods that we can use to teach these students. We need to get our kids excited about sciences. They're competing with brilliant minds all over the world today. I mean, it's no longer competing in US or competing in California or competing in Silicon Valley. You're really competing with people from all over the world, the best and the brightest. And they're no longer necessarily coming here. They're doing those things in their own regions, in their own countries. So one of the things that I saw at least lacking, it seems like it is a bit more of the same. We are investing a lot of money, we're incrementally investing more. But there isn't, a lot of ideas there. How do we get people interested? Right before the event started, I was talking to Martha, and we're talking about interesting web-based material. How do you put all the material for education on the web, and how do you create much easier environment for kids to learn, much better environments for kids to learn. We are funding tremendous amount of technology companies in open source, creating a complete infrastructure worldwide where everybody's contributing, learning into these technologies. I don't see any initiatives, in that side, in our budgets or in our thought processes. Sciences is it's no longer about math and physics or math and basic sciences. We're going to compete in the future. It's all about how do you bring biological sciences, physical sciences, math, physics, chemistry. How do you bring all of these sciences together to participate in the revolutions of the nano biotechnologies that are going on? Our kids are not ready. They don't have any ideas. They're not excited. I mean, if you look at the numbers in terms of where kids are going, 60% lower rate in engineering admissions, in computer science and engineering admission just over the last 3 years. If you look at the females, the numbers are staggering. 93% over the last 20 years, lower numbers for females wanting to be interested in going towards engineering or science careers. So, we're clearly not getting our kids excited about sciences. So whatever we do, the way we've been doing it, to me, it's not working. We're not, for us, we need employees for today, and we need entrepreneurs for tomorrow, so we can fund these people, who can create these enterprises, create those tax dollars for you. I'm sure the Google idea was nice to do the tax budget. So, we need to create more enterprises like that. And And so I think, you know, those are the things that I see, you know, that we're not adding to education, particularly multidisciplinary sciences. That's one area where I think unless we really get it right, we're going to be in tough competition with the rest of the world. And the other thing that is very interesting as an employer, again, I'll speak, you know, as interesting of what I want when these kids graduate. I want multidisciplinary scientists. I want these people to be highly educated so they can lead the charge in the next generation companies. But communication, that's one of the biggest gripes that we see in the world today, of the working world today, is kids are not able to communicate. You know, they're dealing with emails, voicemails, SMS, that's how they communicate with each other. Most of them are not educated. Most of them cannot articulate themselves. Most of them can't get the point across. And I'll tell you, email is one of the worst ways to piss people off. You know, somebody sends an email, they think they're doing a great job, and boy, you know, you piss off all of a sudden 500 people that you sent it to. It's just because people they don't have the etiquette, they don't have the training, they don't have the understanding of how to get your point across, how to do that. So I think, in addition to, I know I'm a scientist by background, you know, started 3 companies in the Valley, all in the engineering space. But I do see, in addition to sciences, that's another area where, you know, as an employer, those are the types of skills that we need if we're going to, you know, find people and find the next generation. So, you know, the combination of the science, technology, engineering, math, you know, the whole concept of STEM that educators talk about, that's very interesting. Add to that multidisciplinary sciences, after that communication, and now you've got, you know, the kids that we want for the future.
Thank you.
Very substantive conversation. I appreciate that, and I thank the foundation for that. I'll tell you, the California Teachers Association, how do you say, you know, Jack called it a maintenance budget. I mean, we have to applaud the governor for giving us a budget that recognizes that public education is a high priority. But you need to understand that's not because this particular governor woke up one day and said, you know what, public education is wonderful. He does the same polling that everybody else does, and you all believe the same thing that just about everybody else does in the state at about a 60% clip. Public education is important. We've got to keep it vital. We've got to do what's necessary to make it better, and we've got to pay for it. And that's a fact. And that governor knows that just like we do. The challenge is, how do we go about doing the things we know are necessary? And just about everybody who's spoken tonight has talked about some of that. I'm going to talk about 2 projects the California Teachers Association has been involved in. About 4 years ago, we decided that we couldn't just talk about reform around public education. In fact, what the California Teachers Association typically does is react to some idea that somebody had. And it usually shows up in the form of an initiative, and then we circle the wagons and fight it off. And we realized that was probably not the best way to go about reforming public education. And one of the things we did was we opened our doors to just about anybody who would come and talk to us about what they believe is essential. And we identified 4 basic areas that just have to be addressed, absolutely have to be addressed if this project, this wonderful project called public education is going to continue to enrich our lives. Number 1, funding is an issue. And you know, you saw Prop 98 has increased funding by $7 billion, 22% since 97-98. It's not enough money. You know, and I'm not just saying that because I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of CTA. I'm a kindergarten teacher from Vacaville, for crying out loud. It's not enough money. But you can't just, as we heard so eloquently from my colleague here on the panel, we can't just raise the money and give everybody the same, because not only does the funding have to be adequate, it has to be equitable. And what were the words? I'm going to tell you, it takes a different amount of money to educate a kid in Oakland than it does in Piedmont. And just about any researcher who spent any time looking at that issue will tell you it takes a different amount of money. So we've got to determine what exactly is it going to cost us to get the training necessary for the teachers to meet the standards that Jack has spent an incredible amount of time developing. How much is that going to cost? And then we've got to determine What's the difference between what it's going to cost in Oakland and what's going to cost in Hillsborough? And we know it's a different cost. Now, to our good fortune, and we heard Bruce talk about this earlier, there are studies coming out. In fact, he's very, very much involved in one of them. And in the next few months, we're going to see a number of studies coming out that are going to address specifically the issue. What does it cost to do what we say needs to be done? And then we've got to get realistic about addressing an equity issue. Now, the second one, teacher compensation. Let's just pretend I'm a 23-year-old graduate. I've got a college degree and I'm looking for a career. County, it's $24,000. And so I'm looking at that, or talking to a business person looking for a career. I'm telling you, teaching is not something that I choose when I consider I'd like to own a home someday. I'd like to have a family. I'd like my kids to be able to go to college. We've got to figure out a way to raise the amount of money that we put into the system, but also how to address salary issues, compensation issues, and we've got to not be afraid to start talking. But that has to happen, and the association is actively involved in arguing that issue. Number three, we've got to get serious about teacher development. And anybody that's spent a good deal of time looking at teacher training, that the discrepancy between what is just really effective and what is not is night and day. And we've got to get serious about it. Personally, I had the good fortune to have good people around me, and I paid attention. But then again, like it was back in the dark ages when I got my credential. Times have changed, and we've got to be willing to take the steps necessary to standardize what we do in such a way today is substantively different than what I was asked to do when I started in 1971. Number four, an Oakland school, and it's not really fair for me to say things like that. I pulled it out. What I'm really talking about, throw a rock at me. I got to talk a little bit about it. Budget, and you got to pay us back on it if we didn't win. We didn't win the lawsuit. The governor saw that he was going to lose, and he wanted to get elected governor, so he was really interested in settling. So here we had a couple choices out to be 67 on the table. The fact that we've got schools that never get enough. What if we focused on those schools? What if we took that $3 billion and we did in decile 1 and 2 schools what everybody knows makes a difference? We focused on realistic class sizes, 1 to 20, not just in kindergarten. And what if we took class size in core subject areas all the way from 4th grade through 12th, and got actually put a counselor to 1 to 3. And then we had to think, man, what's that going to cost? And then we saw what it costs. And we tried to figure out how long would it take us to really play that out and see it. If we focused on 500 or 600 schools, 600 or 700 schools in that ballpark, we could do this for 7 years. And that's what we laid out to the governor. The governor said, cool. And so that's SB 1133. And there's about $300,000 in this budget that begins SB 1133.